Apyayantu mamangani vak pranashchakshu shrotramadho balamindriyani cha sarvani sarvam brahma upanishadam maham brahma nirakuryam mama brahma nirakarot anirakaranam astvanirakaranam me astu tadatmani nirate upanishatsu dharmaste mayi santu te mayi santu. Shanti Shanti Shanti. So let's go over the detailed explanation of Vak. So Vak means healthy speech. So this means that, see, when you speak, right, you can burn things, you can start wars, but you can also express your forgiveness, you can say sorry, you can build a relationship. And so in this sense, you are endowed with an instrument to do great things for yourself. You can find a teacher, you can learn to understand, you can ask a question and help you resolve your doubt, or you can choose to use that vak and not say anything, and thereby that doubt remains with you. It's entirely up to you. Now, in the Vedas, we have a beautiful model how to use your vak in an effective way. And the first is what we say, Satyam Vadam. Satyam Vadam means, these are Sanskrit words, I've always converted into English, so it's okay, is whenever you speak, the individual thinks about, am I coming from a place of what I truly feel? Is my feeler keeping with what I'm saying? Or is it that I feel one thing, but I'm saying something different to you? In this sense, there is a split in the personality, because inside the individual, they understand I'm not telling the truth. What my lips are saying is something different than what I feel. And thereby, what happens is this develops into a complex. The person ends up not trusting themselves. So this means you end up hurting yourself if you're not quite congruent with what is it that you feel inside and what is it that you want to express. And now the question is, suppose you say exactly what is to be said and you stick with the facts. So you are clear what is it that you are holding in your mind and you speak it. The question now is, how does it come out of your lips? Because you can say something like, hey, you look fat today. Yesterday you looked thin. Today you look fat. And suppose you sort of feel that, you think that's true. But the way that it's delivered is hurtful. It's using a hurtful tone. It's using a hurtful language. And even if you communicate a fact, it may not always strike a chord with the other person. And you say, what's the problem? I was honest, I did the right thing. Well, we have not only Satyam Vadam, truthful, factual speaking. That means what I feel is what I say. But we also have, how is it that I deliver this information outwards? Am I considering the right timing? Are you in the right mood to accept what is to be received? Is it that I want to say something important, but the question then comes, yes, it is important, but how do I wish to deliver this message? So this means one needs to become sensitive to how do you deliver your messages. Otherwise, even if you're very intelligent and a fella may find themselves, like, no one's listening to me, no one's kind of paying attention, the answer is because there's a certain tone that we're sensitive to. We pick up the undertone behind our words, and this undertone is Priyamvadam. For example, speak louder, right? Like, whoa, and there's a different way to say this, I'm having a hard time hearing you. Could you, increase the volume just a little bit? So it makes a huge difference because the person feels that. And so like this, we can also suppose that you say the right thing, it's factual, and you deliver it in the right way. But if you look at what you deliver, it's just, most of it is just passing time. It's not beneficial. It's sort of a little bit of talk about like what went on, and you're like, this went on and here's what was the teaching. But then in the middle of the conversation, you throw a criticism about the individual that you're speaking about. The reason why this doesn't work is because as human beings, we have a need for continuity, a thread of continuity. So if that thread gets broken with something that's not appropriate, then the entire conversation loses context. So for example, you can go out and start to say, this was wonderful talk and this is what I needed to hear. And so you kind of share your knowledge. But then in the middle of that, you say, and I know this teacher who's like this, and they're like totally don't get it. And it's like, why are you bringing somebody else who's not here? And do you really know somebody else, right, who you're bringing up? So this means we have to have a certain continuity of thread where it is hitam vadam. Hitam vadam means, if you remember h for H, hitting the mark, it's beneficial. So the question is this conversation right now beneficial to your well-being, and is it beneficial to my well-being? Are we both having an enhancement? Are we both improving our outlook on what is being discussed right now? So therefore, satyam vadam, what I speak is what I understand. What I speak and what I understand is delivered in a certain tone, in a certain pleasantness. So priyam vadam, for pleasantness. There's a certain pleasantness about your demeanor, about your personality. And even if it's pleasant and it's factual, then still, is it beneficial? Sometimes it may not be appropriate to say some things. There's a certain place. And so it's okay. If you slip up in one of these, there's always a chance for recovery. And that chance is what we call Ishwara's feedback system, which is always available to you, to me, to everyone. How we use it is up to us. We can either ignore it and say, no, it's their problem, or we can say, maybe I was too insensitive, maybe I came on too, confrontationally, maybe I need to understand where they're coming from. So this is also part of the communication model. And then we have Ritam Vadam. Now, Ritam Vadam is what you say is fully cooked. Let's put it this way. Fully cooked means the food that you deliver, the material that you deliver, it is fully researched. So R is for research. So this means that, for example, what sometimes happens is that we are quick to discard another human being. So we know a few information about someone, but what you don't know is all of the struggles, all of the achievements, all of the charity, all of the good things that someone has done in their life. And we never get to find that out. And thereby, the only information, as I said in session 1, is we have limited information. Remember, I'm going to give you two more things that from which every person is speaking from. I told you samskara and limited information. There's two more coming. So because everyone has limited information, then what can happen is we can deliver it not well researched. And later on, you discover this in yourself and you feel, oh my God, I shared something that is not true. I dismissed this person, what kind of a person I am. So this means before speaking, the question is, do I know the facts? Is this well looked into? Is this matter decently researched? Sometimes you will see these messages on WhatsApp. They get spread like wildfire. Everyone's just forwarding stuff. But, you read this and it's like, this is just, it's kind of like half-cooked material. It's conspiracies. when COVID came, what happened? Things are saying, no, this is all government conspiracy. They're trying to implant us with these things. And then people just start to, just send this left and right, sending out disinformation. And all it takes is just 10 seconds of Google search to see the matter. And it makes a huge difference. Therefore, not only does one speak from what they are sensitive to. What I am sensitive, what I'm in touch with is what I speak. That is a master communicator. What makes a master communicator is what they feel right now is exactly what they speak. And when they speak it, they're sensitive. What is going on right now in my listener? Are they shaking their heads? How well are they listening? Do I need to adjust my tone? Do I need to maybe revise what I said again? So the person is very attuned with every face that is being confronted with. Amongst that, I have to understand that I cannot just say things and then walk away thinking I've understood, and I have just sort of walk away proudly, dismissing the person's struggles, dismissing somebody else's achievements, their charities, and all of the good things they have done. Therefore, when these three plus Hitam Vadam get added, beneficial talk, then we have something that you can have a productive conversation with. Sometimes we say, why do I need rituals? I don't do rituals. This is for those pundits who do rituals. I don't need rituals. That's it. I'm happy now. Look how quickly one dismissed that. Has one even asked, what is the purpose of prayers and rituals? What is the real benefit of rituals? That one question comes in, and already the entire conversation changes. And the answer is, every ritual is an action. Every prayer is an action. Every action is a cause. Every cause has an effect. The longer or the more effort you put into a cause, into an action, the better, the greater the benefit, the effect you receive. When it comes to prayers, like why do I need prayers? They don't work. This shows you that the intellect isn't asking what is the purpose of prayers and what is the logic of prayers. It's very simple. Prayer is an action. It's an effect. It's an action. Every action put into the field will have some reaction. That is the law. That is how it works. You cannot find anything in this universe which has a cause without having an effect. Thereby, the person starts to ask, so if a prayer is a cause, then no action gets wasted in this universe. There is not one action you can apply in this universe which has no corresponding effect. You may not understand or see or experience that effect immediately. In most cases, that effect is delayed. Maybe a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of years usually. And in that sense, I understand, what I do now is going to shape the nature of my future, is going to change my future, and I want to be in that future, which is going to be pleasant and conducive for me. And how do I make my future pleasant and conducive? How do I make that effect pleasant and conducive for my growth? By applying corresponding actions which will most likely increase the chances of the future becoming conducive and pleasant for you. And what kind of actions? Such as prayers, because it is an action. Now, what's the difference between a prayer and a ritual? Well, a prayer is very short. It usually involves asking for something that you want, something that you value. Whereas a ritual is like a prayer, but it involves a lot more effort out of you. It's longer. And the law is, the more effort you put into anything, building a business, growing, stronger, going to the gym, working on your memory, the more effort you put into something, the greater your returns. So in that sense, all it takes is a few minutes of research. What is the purpose of a ritual, a prayer? And thereby Hitam Vadam is now well researched. And I can then deliver that information to the listener. So these four models, Satyam Vadam, what I feel is what I speak, but not just speak it anyhow, speak it with a certain tone, Priyam Vadam, with a certain pleasantness, with a certain culture attached to it. Amidst that, I have to research what I say. What I say is well researched. It gives you confidence to say it. And it has to also be beneficial, relatively beneficial to the person's stage of life and to the context of the situation, to the situation itself. Okay. Then it says prana. So vak, prana, chakshu. So now we're at prana. So these are physiological functions. These are functions such as right, digestion and energy, how strong you feel. Now, the question is, how do you improve prana? How do you improve energy? Give me some ideas. How do you improve your energy? Besides coffee, how do you improve energy?
Breathing exercise.
The what?
Breathing.
Breathing, yeah, like pranayama. It's a very powerful, yeah, it works. I do this myself. How else? Asanas, definitely. Any particular asanas? Maybe you find out. There's many asanas. Okay, you find out which one you want. Any other ideas? How do we gain energy?
Meditation. Sleep ritual.
Sleep?
Sleep ritual.
Sleep ritual?
Yeah, a good sleep.
Okay, good sleep. Okay, sleep ritual. Okay, we have a good long sleep. Yes. How else do you get energy? Vedanta, exactly. The right food. So we'll take the example of a food. See, food is something that nourishes you, and food can, like anything in this world, can become a fetish. And yes, okay, suppose it's a fetish, but then the person has to ask themselves, what is my loss by having constant attachment to food and thinking about food? So again, we're not saying don't eat, right? Too much food. We're just saying ask yourself the question, is there any real loss? Like, if I'm honest to myself, what is my lust here? If I'm kind of coming back to food and constantly snacking on this and that and thinking about cakes and what have you. Another ritual when it comes to food is that every time you eat, you have chance to reconnect to a larger order, which is Ishvara, which is why we pray before we eat. In chapter 4, we say, you don't have to say it in Sanskrit, but we say it Om Brahmarpanam Brahmahavihi Brahmagno Brahmana Hutam Brahmevate Gantavyam Brahma Karma Samadhina. Now, a lot of people just chant this, and I watch them, and they just start to eat. But if you really analyze what this means, it's amazing. It says that Brahman is the name for reality, the whole reality, is not only the eater. So the eater who's eating this food is Brahman. The enzymes that are digesting this food is Brahman. The one who made this food is Brahman. The action of making this food is Brahman. The farmer, who I will have never met in my life and never will, is Brahman. The sun, which is responsible for supplying the plants with nutrients, is Brahman. The plants themselves is Brahman. The soil is Brahman. The tongue is Brahman. This nutrition is Brahman. May this food nourish this body so that this body and mind can be available to do what is to be done in this world, so it can remain sharp and does what is important for you with zeal, with enthusiasm, with energy. You have a chance to pray like this. How many times do you eat? 3 times a day? Do you ever wonder why people eat 3 times a day? Did you know it used to be once a day? Only recently, in the last 150 years, plus minus, it became 3 times a day. I did some research on this, Ritam Vadam, online. Okay, it's very interesting. Either way, so if you eat 3 times a day, you have 3 chances to pray and reconnect with the divine order. Because I know someone's going to ask eventually, how do I bring this down into my life? Look at this. Do you eat? Yes. Every time you eat, you have a chance to bring down this knowledge into your life, to be reminded that this food is much more than just food. It is God itself. And then you think about how many things took place for this food to show up in my in my plate. So many things. The rains, the clouds, again, evaporation, the sun, the plants, the trucks which packaged, and the packagers, and that person who designed the truck, and the person who created, who got oil out. So many people responsible for delivering your food in your plate. In other words, every time you eat, you have a chance to bring the connections, millions of connections that were required, starting not only from 500 years ago, all the way from when Earth was made. The lava and the steam and the cooling down and the cyanobacteria, which was the first bacteria helping to disperse oxygen into the atmosphere, and then the trees manifesting, and then the dinosaurs dying out, and then having three major cataclysmic extinctions, and each time it giving place for new mammals, eventually giving place for you to be now enjoying your food here, saying okay. So many connections. See, this is how a mind thinks. It's able to connect. A shallow mind, it just goes, oh, food, eat. The wiser the person becomes, the more wider they're able to think. This is a natural quality of a mind that thinks. So now, to kind of say, this is too intellectual, it doesn't make sense. It's got nothing to do with being intellectual, being in your heart. Just seeing what is, just being able to bring an order right here in this moment. One thing that we have about food is never throw food away. And in some cultures, this can be a strong impression. Now look at this. Your body is telling you, stop. You're full. Your body is an indicator. It's an emotional indicator of what needs to change, what needs to be different. And your intellect is saying, no. You should not throw food away. This is not right. So what are you doing here? It's a very innocent thing. So my intellect is overriding the only indicator I have for my growth, which is your body. So this means if I'm using my intellect to shut down the indicator in the body, then what else is the intellect shutting down in real world? It's shutting down, perhaps you need to take a break, or learn this, or meditate more, or change your approach. And it all starts with food. What I want to show you is how it's connected. It's not like food is one thing. I can just eat whatever I want, even if I'm full. The whole thing is connected. How I have a relationship with food is how I have a relationship with everything else. The system inside says, you need to right now just take a break, breathe. But then the intellect says, no, this is all, I don't need to do that. So it's like this, becoming sensitive to your own emotional indicators. We often say, I need a guru to tell me what to do. Your own body is telling you what to do. It just has to start by actually listening. Okay. Now, the next is Shrotram. Shrotram is healthy hearing. So again, when we hear something, we assess what we hear. And based on what we assess, then you can make a free choice. What is it that you want to do with that information? And even, music is wonderful, right? However, anything in this world can become a coping mechanism. Even music, constant music, can become a source of holding down what I feel uncomfortable with. Like the louder the music, the more I kind of hold down what is uncomfortable. So music, like anything, can be a wonderful thing, but it can also be used to suppress certain things, to use my ears for a lot of music. So now, chakshuhu. Chakshuhu is eyes, physical eyes. And like ears, they just report what's in front of you. That's all eyes do. They're not trying to fool you. They're not trying to take you off track. Their job is to report what's in front of you. Now, whatever you want to do with that, it is up to you. And sometimes we need to ask ourselves, if I expose my eyes to something which my eyes were exposed to before, and it hasn't quite led to my peace, how likely is it that I will have peace if I expose my eyes again to the same thing? Very unlikely. So this means one comes to know, what do I expose my eyes to that triggers me in a way that kind of disturbs me? Do I even know that? If I do, wonderful. Then simply take that out of your life. You don't have to keep on looking at that. This is why you can put nice pictures on the wall, because your mind is like looking right through your eyes. And so if your eyes see some inspiring figure, some devata, then that draws the right kind of inspiration in you. So this means that your mind has to lead whatever your eyes see. Okay. The question is it beneficial for me? Is it beneficial for what you want in life? So again, your senses are just instruments given to you. And who is in the driver's seat of those instruments? The senses? No, you. You are the driver. Therefore, I have a certain responsibility. Where do I want to expose my senses and for how long? Listening to chatter is okay, but do you know when is that point when you've listened to too much chatter where it's just going to become non-beneficial to you and you're just going to sort of feel like you're just wasting time, like I don't want to be here? Do you know that moment? So we're not saying anything's wrong with chatter, anything's wrong with soap operas or anything. It's just that for how long do I expose myself? And after that point, it becomes to be something that kind of starts to make my mind disturbed. So this is to be known by the individual who cares about their instrument. And then mind. Okay, now mind, again, why do we need a healthy mind? So, like anything, your mind is an instrument, and your mind can either liberate you or send you down a path that is very hard to come out of. So your own mind that you're endowed with is your best friend or worst enemy. Now, who chooses which one of those it is? Who chooses that? Who chooses whether your mind is best friend or your worst enemy? Your mind? You're going to say, I do. Now the question is, what is this I that chooses? And this is why we have to investigate what is that part of the mind that chooses what the mind gets exposed to and how it thinks. So let's look at the mind. So when I say mind, it is different from the physical brain. And this will be explained later, and I will show you how the mind is different from the physical brain. So your mind is made up of several components. What are they? The first is manas. Manas. Manas is what we call the seed of emotion. So when it comes to emotion, we often sometimes, explode all at once, holding it in, holding it in, holding it in, and then suddenly he or she or it does something, and it just comes to that boiling point, and you're just no longer willing to hold it in, and you just explode. And during that explosion, there's a tendency to bring all unrelated things and then put them inside that moment. And you're like, what does this have to do with this moment? You're just kind of bringing things that happened 10 days ago, 50 days ago, and you're just throwing it all into this box. And then it's like now you've lost the original matter that triggered it. And so the whole beneficial talk, the hitam vadam, is gone. So the person has to be careful. It's okay to explode. We're not saying don't, because that's the nature of emotions, right? But when there is an explosion, in reference to what specifically is it? The only other way is just to generalize. It's because you do this, you said this, and you didn't say hello, and then you didn't call me, and then remember that moment? And the person's just listening and going, my God, now the whole last 1 year becomes a problem, okay? So this is something to be looked at. And what the seed of emotion means is that you have a healthy emotional system, which means it responds appropriately with the situation. So for example, suppose there's a marriage celebration and you go to the wedding and you're sitting at the back and you're going, I should be there, you know, they got so many people, yeah, I've got none. If this was my marriage, it would be one person and they're so happy and I'm jealous, you know, it's not like I'm envious, I should be there, I don't like this, I feel so lonely, I don't have as many friends as they do. And so all of these voices start to come. In other words, what's happening in front of you is a happy moment. There are two people who are enjoying this, and all of their friends are probably happy for them. We don't know. But at least two people in front are. And the fella at the back is having completely inappropriate response. This is called an unhealthy emotional system. It's not keeping with what is. On the other hand, conversely, someone's at the hospital and you go to the hospital and you don't put up a smile. Oh, you know, it's just your body's decaying. Don't worry about it. But you show a certain empathy, a certain sympathy, or certain kind of connection. You want to give them some solace. So again, you're feeling with the situation. It's got nothing to do with the world is unreal and it's just there's no point reacting to any of it. This is not a healthy person because you're given a mind whose job is to keep with what is. That is a healthy mind. Okay. And then we have one more thing which is called artificial lows and highs. Putting oneself in an artificial high. The expectations are so high that when you come there, you're still in your bubble of expectations and they're driving your emotions. And when things don't quite turn out as you've imagined, then there is a artificial low and the person falls straight down and it just makes an extreme end of the first half. So you see these two different people. So this means there's a certain kind of word in the Gita called samatvam. Samatvam means having a relatively equanimous mind. Now, an equanimous mind doesn't mean just remaining cold and non-responsive to situations. It means that you have a certain understanding. A situation is a situation. Ultimately, it has something to offer, but it's just one of the thousands of situations that's going to come and go into my life. So there's no need to put anything in a kind of a big thing or idolize anything and put yourself in this big box, because Ishvara always brings you back down to earth. So this means samatvam is just staying with what is. It's just being normal, like down to earth. In the West, we call this being grounded, just being grounded with what is. So in this sense, the stories also can change, because the story that we give ourselves can make us kind of this inflated sense of identity, and then the world doesn't match that, then there is a fall. And the world can never match your imagination, because imagination is always higher than the world can give you. Thereby, the next one, which is still part of manas, is sankalpa vikalpa. So sankalpa vikalpa is your faculty of looking at what options are available to you. We often call it doubting, but another way to express it is you're offered possibilities and you're looking at which possibility is best and which possibility do I want to collapse, which is in my self-interest or the interest of the whole environment, not just your self-interest, but also the interest of those with whom you are interacting with. And the language of this is, should I do this? Should I do this? Should I do that? Should I go? Should I stay? I don't know what to do. But either way, whatever you choose, know this, you can never make a right choice. Why? Remember first session? Limited information. No matter what choice you're making, it's always under the umbrella of limited information. Therefore, the common question we ask is, how do I know if I'm making the right choice? The best you can do is inform yourself. But even if you inform yourself tomorrow, that can no longer be valid. It's valid today. Tomorrow, it's no longer valid. So even if you research today, because everything has changed tomorrow already, it negates all of the planning and all of the research that you've done today. This is also a possibility. So the point is not to get it right. Nobody can get it right. In fact, getting it right is delusional. Rather, am I informed about my decision? Now let me make a decision. Knowing fully well, I can still falter with my decision. But if I do falter, either way, Ishwara is going to give you feedback, and based on that feedback, you can make a new course correction and adjust. So this is a point to keep in mind. You will never make a right decision. There is no right decision because there is always a new decision which would have opened different doors. But one door has to be closed. Otherwise, we're just constantly, oh, which door, which door, which door. And this is called information seeker, information gatherer. So as long as I cannot collapse and close the door, I remain an eternal seeker, collecting information, collecting information, collecting information, collecting information. Why? Because I am identified with this oscillating system. Should I do this? Should I do this? And we've seen spiritual seekers, or any kind of seeker, in this kind of mode, just hopping, reading this book, a little bit of that book, a little bit of Vedanta, a little bit of Buddhism, which is all fine, but never coming to one system and saying, I'm going to stick to this and I'm going to understand what it's talking about. And when that happens, that means you've closed the door and you said, I'm going to now stick with this. No more seeking, information gathering, hopping. Okay, now, and one more thing I want to mention is sometimes when it comes to making a decision, what we do is we say it's either going to be like this or it's going to be like that. Either I will or I won't. But in between, how many nuances are there? A lot. And there's an example. There was a true story. A wife who was married. She was a professional dancer before she got married. And during her marriage, she had kids, and her husband didn't want her going back into her dancing career because he was sort of happy with her being at home. And her decision could have been either, okay, so I'm just going to, now that the kids have grown up relatively well, I can either leave him and pursue my career, or I can stay and just swallow the pain of not, living out my passion of dancing. These are the two choices she could have done. But what does she do? She says, hey, let me go to the dancing for one day. He says, no problem. One day is nothing. And so she goes for one day. And then next week or 2 weeks later, she says, let me go twice. This is kind of fun. Oh, no problem. You already gone once a week. Twice a week won't hurt. And so she goes for twice a week. Eventually, she starts going and gets invited to competitions. By now, the husband is already used to it. The husband's got no objections and no interruptions there. It's all sorted out. So this means there's a certain way to negotiate. You have to find the language by which the other person can know it is in their interest, but it's also in your interest. And this language you need to discover. What language do I use, and how do I communicate what I want in such a way that it clearly fulfills my needs, but also it fulfills their needs. And I have to speak in a way that it accounts both of our needs. So like this, you're able to negotiate your way and maintain your emotional well-being. Because if this woman didn't dance, she would have been emotionally unwell. Okay? Now, buddhi. This is the second component of your mind. The buddhi consists of what we say cognitive capacity. Cognitive capacity is your thinking. So if I ask you, if I ask you like 5 times 3, and you're kind of going, okay, 5 times 5 is 15, right? Or if I ask you anything that involves thinking capacity, that is what your buddhi does. It brings logics and it sees how things fit. It connects the puzzles together and sees the associations. How is this connected to that? And how is that connected to this? So if I don't have this, then all I can do is just live in one kind of a narrow zone. So the buddhi therefore needs to flourish. It needs to find how is it that Atma is free. And then we provide a logic, which is coming, by the way. How is it that I is free? And then we will use logic. In fact, we'll use a lot of logic in Kena Upanishad because it is Upanishad, it is advanced. Bhagavad Gita is, as we'll do tomorrow, is, it's easier, but Upanishad is always in a more of an advanced student. So advanced student means you need to have a certain mind capable of bringing it all together. And not that I will overwhelm, right? We will do it step by step. But either way, you cannot throw your logic away. And this is why I said earlier, right? If a person wants to go into their heart, this is wonderful. But do not forget your mind also. They are both important. They both are required to understand the truth of who you are. Okay? Now, the second component of buddhi is called Nishchayatmika buddhi. Nishchayatmika, you don't have to take the Sanskrit, just Nishchayatmika means the buddhi collapses one of those options from the mind. So your mind, as I said earlier, is sankalpa vikalpa, oscillating. Should I do this or that? What happens is eventually the buddhi grabs that and says, okay, this is what you will do now. Let's go and see what happens with this option. So the buddhi eventually captures your mind and says, this will be done. This is why you say to someone, make up your mind. Make up your mind. So what is you saying? The mind is going left and right. In other words, stop going left and right. Should I or should I not? Make one choice and make a decision. So the first is manas, which is the seed of emotion. The second one is your buddhi, the intellect, cognitive capacity. Make sense? And the third one is chittam, your memory. So chittam again is important because your whole life and understanding anything involves connecting dots that you've heard from the past and bringing that into the present. So today we're kind of like at a disadvantage because everything is provided. You don't have to remember your phone number. It's all just sort of offered on a silver platter. However, the thing is, you need a relatively good memory that's able to say, hey, didn't you say that like 2 sessions ago? And that gives you a chance to bring that unresolved doubt and bring it forward into the present and connect it to something else that I'm saying. And how do you develop a good memory? Any tips? How to develop a good memory? Learn a new language. It's not a matter of speaking a language, just learning it. Any language that you want. In other words, learning to create new connections in your brain. A new connection is what builds gray matter. So by the time we reach 60 or 80, right, the person is kind of like a little bit, it's not so easy to remember anymore. Well, you have a chance learning a language, something that you're passionate about, Sanskrit, I don't know what language you want to learn. The point is not to master it. That's not what I'm saying. Just to learn something to keep the mind engaged. And also, I have heard that learning also cuts down on the chance of Alzheimer's or dementia. So this is something that you can also incorporate if you want. Yeah. So anything that stimulates your mind, anything that engages your mind to think, to develop new connections. Okay. And then we have ahamkara. Ahamkara means, often people translate it into ego, ego. Now, the word ego in English has 2 connotations. The first is excess pride. So she's got a big ego. So what they're really saying is they got an excess pride about themselves. In other words, absence of humility. But that is not the definition that we mean in this case. In this case, the word ego really means the mechanism that lets you survive. What do I mean by that? For example, if you're hungry, if your body's hungry, do you start to feed somebody else? No? So what do you say? You say, I am hungry. So look at this. For example, right now, the body is picking up the glass. The hand is transferring the glass into the other hand. Now the muscles are moving. They're going to tilt the glass about 50 degrees for the water to enter. The lips are going to make contact with the glass. And then the water is now going down the trachea into the stomach. And now the reversal process is happening. The muscle pressure is being applied, transferring to the other hand. It's moving to the right, and now it's putting the glass down. And then finally, how many steps did that involve? So many. But what do we say? I am drinking. So the whole thing is put inside one single word. I am drinking. But what was actually drinking? The hand was involved, the lifts were involved. Where's the question of I? See this? So in other words, your ahamkara is consisting of two words, and they are aham. Now there's no problem with your aham. Aham is I, right? I. But the challenge is this second word, kara. So what kara does is it makes the I seem like it is drinking, seem like it is thinking, seem like it is doing something. The aham is completely fine. It's the kara, the mechanism that is meant to help bring your experience to a single individual. So there's nothing wrong with ahamkara. It's just meant to help you to have an experience as a single individual so you can survive in this world. Okay? So what Vedanta says is, you're not here to destroy your ego, because ego is not something that you created, just like you didn't create the sun. It is just to be used to understand you're much bigger than this mechanism, which makes it seem like I, which is all pervasive, am stuck in this body alone. In actuality, you're not stuck in this body alone, but you need the ahamkara to figure that out. So again, the ahamkara is giving the sense, the kara is giving the sense that aham, that I, is walking, doing, thinking, looking, shaking the head, yawning, dying, being born, having an experience, meditating, having nirvikalpa or whatever, okay? The aham is completely fine. So it's another mechanism that you need for your self-preservation and your self-growth. And this ahamkara then gets loaded with so many options, so many opinions. It says, I am like this, I am no good, I am professional, and it gets exaggerated. For example, Ravana in Ramayana, he was doing a lot of tapas, a lot of rituals, and he was blessed by Lord Shiva, and he thought, I am now invincible because I have so much success in my life and so much power. So initially it all started as I am doing the ritual, and then the ritual provided the result, and now I am so blessed, I am so much better, I am so big. So like this, the I gets loaded, and then Vedanta says you first need to unload this loaded I so that it can be used intelligently rather than to create these opinions about who you are. Therefore, question is then, how do you have a healthy I sense? How do you develop a healthy I sense? So how do we kind of reduce it and bring it back to normal rather than having this inflated sense of I or a deflated I? Huh? Being modest. Yeah, being modest. So what does modesty mean? Like, how many people do you need to be successful in your life, to be where you are? How many people did you actually require to be here right now? If I take that out, then I say I am here because of me, my success. But actually, if you look at your experience, you are here because of people who have recommended you, and your health is here, and the food is also contributed to you. So the moment I understand that I need others for my success, I need you for me to prosper, and you need me for you to prosper, then we have modesty coming in. In other words, there is no question of I don't need you, I don't need you, I've got others. This is not true. The fact is, you do need somebody else for your prosperity. This is a fact. It's not a belief. Another thing to make your I sense healthy is you can bring the laws of Ishvara. For example, we're both breathing the same air. we're both, right, our bodies are, right, operated by the same intelligence. The same intelligence is beating your heart and my heart. It's not like, I have privileges. We're both given the same privilege of feedback. You get feedback for your actions. Everyone gets feedback for their actions. And this feedback always lets you know whether you're on the right track or how far you've gone off track. So like this, I can see, there's a feedback. There's a bigger thing than me. Because if I was in charge, I would be getting 24/7 whatever you wanted. But there is a bigger order. And therefore, by understanding and bringing this order, you say, I am actually just one of the many here, one of the many manifestations. And I don't get my way here. If I did, I would be a living proof of it, but no one is a living proof. You can have many people on stage talking about law of attraction, how they applied it and they got in whatever they want in life. But if you get to know them 5 years later, 10 years later, then it's still not working out. Nobody's getting exactly what they want. So by understanding this, you reduce that inflated I sense, or even if, what about low I sense, feeling deflated, like I'm no good. Okay, in reference to what are you no good? In reference to whom are you no good? In fact, understanding the bigger picture, you see that you are one of the many manifestations that play a huge role in this life and influence so many other people in ways that you couldn't even imagine. How many people did you influence? I don't know. There was a movie, a black or white movie, which I don't remember what it's called, but there was a fella who he wanted to jump off a bridge, and an angel came by. An angel changed his life around and said, okay, I'm going to show you what a life would be without you. And so he came back home and he knocked on the door, and his wife was not there, it was somebody else. And he was shocked, like, oh, where's my wife? They're not there. And then he looked at his friends that he used to know, and they're no longer happy. And the town is different. And he realized, became grateful how much of an impact he was making, or she was making, in this world. So this means there's no space for feeling deflated, because you do make a huge, vast difference in this world. And sometimes we just have to remember that and understand, hey, because it's not fair to think like that about an instrument that God has given you, to insult that instrument and say it's no good, or to insult that mind. Okay. Now, Sarvam Brahma Upanishadam. Sarvam Brahma Upanishadam. So, in other words, my desire to understand Brahman is authentic. It's coming from a mature place. So, in other words, you're not trying to understand Brahman to kind of inflate the ego. Let me now understand this, or whatever, fix some problems in the world. It's not how it is. You're just understanding who you are. So you're coming from a mature place. And what this means is, in Chandogya Upanishad, chapter 7, there's a nice metaphor which presents you with 3 buckets. And the sun, there's a sun which is always shining. Okay, the sun is always shining bright. And it's just being itself. That's all the sun does. It just shines brightly. And there are 3 buckets, and they are desperately wanting to know this beautiful sun. And one of the buckets is sort of murky, right? The murky water. And the bucket in the middle is, it's a little bit dirty water, but it's a lot cleaner than the first one. And the third bucket is very clean, right? And the sun is equally blessing all 3 of them. It's not discriminating. I like you, I don't like you. It's just shining, doing what it does. It's shining. But the first bucket, hasn't quite gone through the process of, so it's okay. I've got more space for creepy crawlies in my mind. That's the water. I can let it get a little bit dirtier. This third bucket, the second bucket in the middle, is kind of in the process of cleaning itself up, but it's still got a lot of things to do. Now the last bucket is clean. And the last bucket is reflecting the sun purely. It's reflecting the wholeness of that sun. And it says, my God, the sun is so beautiful, and I am just so cheerful. Because why? Because I've cleaned up my mind. I've cleaned up my stories. I brought my eye sense back to where it belongs, to its natural state of just using this instrument, doing what is to be done. And everything else is just stories about what needs to happen, what doesn't need to happen, what expectations, expecting this, expecting that. I want more of this, I want less of this, I don't want that, I want this. These are all stories, just adding more dirt to the bucket. So the third bucket therefore enjoys a certain equanimity, which we call samatvam, equanimity of the mind. Things come and go like to any one of those other buckets, but it has, it finds refuge in the brightness of the sun. So like this, Sarvam Brahma Upanishadam, in other words, may my desire to know Brahman be authentic. And why do I want Brahman? Because it is who I am. It is that which is immortal, pure, like the sun, which in whom the entire universe resides. For this reason, I want Brahman. And the question is, what is Brahman? Okay? Now I know we're at 1 hour mark. I'm going to finish this. So what is Brahman? Brahman comes from the root word brh. Brh. Okay? That's the Sanskrit root. Brh means to grow or to expand. Or in one word, it means big. Now, how big? As big as the Eiffel Tower? As big as a worm? As big as a piece of dust? As big as a universe? No. Because the way that we look at the word big is we look at big as an adjective, right? So the adjective always qualifies a noun. Okay, so if the Eiffel Tower, then big as Eiffel Tower, or a snake, big as a snake. So in this case, Brahman is not an adjective. It's not in reference to something else. It is a noun in itself. So in other words, Brahman means big. How big? Limitlessly big. That means there's nothing bigger than Brahman. That means everything is inside Brahman. There is nothing smaller than Brahman because Brahman is also there. In other words, what is Brahman? Brahman is just in one simple truth, I, who I am, because it is the whole reality. Now the question is, if Brahman is limitless, can it exclude you? Because if it excludes you, is it limitless? No, because you are now limiting Brahman and Brahman is limiting you. That means Brahman is everything minus you. That is not limitless. It is now limited by you. So Brahman only becomes limitless when you understand yourself to be Brahman. Until then, I can say Brahman is limitless, but it's only an intellectual thing. Only when I include myself as all that is here as Brahman, only then Brahman gains the true status of limitless. And who is that limitless one? I, the one who has understood that. Therefore, Sarvam Brahma Upanishadam, this Brahman cannot exclude me because it is one non-dual reality. That means non-dual means there's no two. When I say limitless, what does limitless mean, the word limitless? It means there's no two. Because the moment you have two, this one is limiting this one and this one is limiting this one. So limitless, another word for limitless is Advaita. Advaita means non-duality, non-dual. Okay? So, now how will I know Brahman? How will I know this reality? You're in this course called Kena Upanishad, through the Upanishads. Okay. Maham Brahma Nirakuryam. Let me not neglect the pursuit of Brahman in this life. What does this mean? Let me not neglect the pursuit of Brahman in this life. What do you think this means? Let me not neglect the pursuit of Brahman in this life. Why would you neglect it? What could make the person neglect the pursuit? too many different things to do, too many focuses on forms, on, right, kind of like I need to do this, which is fine, right? You actually do. But if one gets taken for a ride, then there's just no time to attend to what needs to be done. In fact, there's a story. There was a guru in the north of India, in this case, and he said to one of the seekers, I can't help you. You need to find the real guru in the south of India. That's where the real guru is. And this seeker said, perfect. I have been recommended by the guru to find the guru. So now this student goes, right, and starts to travel. And amongst the travels, they see so many lovely mountains and so many sightseeing. So they stop over, take some photos. And then this fella finds a pretty girl, and initially goes, "Oh, she's pretty, but I've got my thing. I'm gonna go south." But then he says, she calls him over. Hey, you're traveling. Of course you need a break. Come over for a tea. He goes over for a tea, and it's all fine, right? First time conversation. But then he kind of sees some beauty in her. He says, "Oh, this is such a nice person, pleasant demeanor. I can see a wife in her." And he says, no, Guru, just listen to the Guru, go south. But her parents show up. And now her parents sort of, say, "Hey, welcome. No, it's okay. Come eat. Stay with us 3 more days. 3 more days, no problem. And then I'll definitely be rested and I'll go south." 3 days pass. Now he's more attached to the pretty girl and to the parents. Eventually he marries, and then he has children. And then the children need to go to school, and now he needs to pay for their expenses, and now the children have children, and now he becomes a grandfather, and then he remembers one day, what happened here? I lost track of what is to be done. Therefore, may I not, right, forget this pursuit of Brahman, despite the so many duties and responsibilities that every person has in this life. Mama Brahmanira Karot. May Brahman not be indifferent to me. So this word, in this case, may Brahman, how can Brahman be indifferent to you? Look at this. May Brahman be not indifferent to me. So this implies that Brahman can be indifferent to you. If Brahman is the only reality, how can that be indifferent to you? What do you think this means? May Brahman be not indifferent to me. How can Brahman be indifferent to me? So what Hari is saying is that if I superimpose a certain notion onto Brahman, then no matter what somebody describes as, I will be pursuing something that Brahman is not. So Brahman is trying to reveal itself to you, and yet you're carrying this notion that Brahman is some big experience that you have to kind of go into and park yourself into, and you're expecting this. But the knowledge is that you are that right now. You're never not that. And therefore, in this sense, no matter what I do, no matter how much you listen, you are as though you're not being blessed by Brahman. You're not being blessed by the knowledge. Another way to interpret this is when it says, may Brahman not be indifferent to me, what it says is, may grace be not indifferent to me. Now, what is grace? See, every time you do an action, okay, an appropriate action, what you do is you collapse possibilities. So all of us are given endless possibilities to collapse. You can become this, you can become that. It's up to you. You can collapse moksha. You can collapse, whatever, marriage or kids or, work or business. So the more you apply the right effort, which is meant to help you understand your truth as Brahman, the more you can get graced by the knowledge, and thereby the knowledge can take place for you. It can become a living reality for you. In other words, you have to collapse the right potential, the right action that will lead you to being blessed by Ishvara, being blessed by this knowledge. In other words, and how do you get blessed by this grace? How do you be graced? How do you get graced? Well, in Vedanta, it is done through prayer. Again, what is prayer? Prayer is understanding that there are variables in this world that are far beyond your control. For example, you want a job and you've prepared and you show up and you still don't get the job. And you were sincere. You know you can help. You know you want the job, but you still don't get it. If you were in total control, you would be able to get whatever you want. But this is simply not the case. So prayer is accessing those unknown variables that you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Those things that are out of your control and making those unknown variables to your favor. Because what prayer does, it accesses, you're praying to the Lord, Lord, may I have the strength to approach whatever challenge comes to me in a way that I can see what is to be done. When I'm most confused, may I know what is to be done. May those variables that would make my life hard, may they reduce in their intensity. So what you're doing through prayer is you're using unknown variables that are not in your favor and you're converting them into your favor through prayer alone. Because prayer is an action like any other. So when you get graced, when you get rewarded, when the prayer answers, that is called grace. I have now been graced. Graced by what? By Ishwara's laws. You applied the right effort to help yourself, and that has been now, it's responded to you in the future. And then you say, wow, I feel so lucky. I'm graced by the Lord's order. Is it an accident? No. It is something that you have deliberately done through your own action. Okay. Anira karanam astu, anira karanam me astu. In other words, may, again, it's just a summary, let me not be indifferent and let me receive grace so that my studies are brilliant. Tadatmani nirateya upanishatsu dharmaste mayisantu. Again, for the studies to be brilliant, what needs to happen? May I have the right attitudes? May I have the right speech? May I use prayer and convert those unknown variables to my advantage? And then what? Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. In other words, we are confronted with 3 possible obstacles. And what are those obstacles? The first one is Atyatmika. In other words, every individual has 3 obstacles that are making it harder for you to attain or to get what you want. And the first one is personal obstacles, Atyatmika. So this is, for example, you want to understand, but you're kind of like falling asleep, right? Or, there's brain fog, right? The brain is not quite turned on. It's not switched on. But you're sincere, right? You want to learn. So you're asking, may those variables, such as brain fog, such as inability to concentrate, such as this kind of thing to lose track of the conversation, may this be reduced? Prayer. The second, if first one is Atyatmika, personal, the second one is Adhibhautika. Adhibhautika is, may the environment in which you find yourself be conducive for your studies, conducive for your well-being. In other words, may my house be warm, may the pillow be soft, may there not be noise in the environment, may things be just right so that I can just immerse myself into the experience. However, even if you've got the right kind of attention and you've got the right environment, still knowledge doesn't always take place. Why? Because adhi-daivika. In other words, daivika, there are certain forces that are beyond your immediate perception, and yet they also play a vast role in how much you're taking this in. There could be what we call karmic account, right? So there's certain like I'm thinking about my family, and so you're put in that situation, right? Your family is making you think about your family, so you cannot not think about them. So in that sense, you're asking, may those, sometimes the dynamic of the class plays a role, right? And it's just not going well. It's like, oh my God, I'm trying to kind of establish some thread of lessons, but it's just not clicking. A teacher sometimes feels this. A student sometimes feels this. Why? Because the whole dynamic of the class contributes to the learning experience of everyone. So what we're asking is, may those variables also be reduced so that we can have a learning experience and understand your nature to be Brahman. Okay, and this has now concluded our prayer. And next session, tomorrow, we will officially begin the first verse of Kena Upanishad. Good question. So the question is being asked is, when you say equanimity of the mind or samatvam, is it related to your values? So as we will see soon, there is something called vairagyam. Vairagyam is a very important idea in Vedanta because it means the absence of coloring things in. So there's a tendency to attribute a lot of value to things. Like, this is very, kind of important to me and it needs to happen my way. So in other words, I'm putting a lot of value to something, and because that is the case, it becomes very important. What we need to do is to understand what is the real value that this object has for me, right? Why am I kind of so attached and invested in this happening the way that it needs to happen? Like, why? Why does it need to happen according to my way? Why can it not happen a different way, right? A way that it's meant to happen. Why does it have to happen my way? So in this sense, what you're doing is you're just kind of paying attention, right? Could this be any different than it already is? Could it be different in reality? Not really. I want it to be different, but this is how it is. In fact, what's being presented to me is the most true state that it's already happening in. And yet my mind's coming in and saying, no, I want it to be a little bit different. For whose sake? For my sake. In other words, what you're saying is, it has to happen according to what I want for my well-being, but am I really accounting the fact that this is the way that it is? There's so many types or cases where, right, I'm putting a lot of work into, right, what I do into teaching, and somebody just doesn't kind of appreciate it, right? They just kind of like sometimes walk out, and I'm like, oh, what can I do about this, right? I'm putting so much work into what I'm doing, and someone just sort of listens once and they walk out. Now, this used to bother me before. Something's wrong with me, maybe I should do better, maybe I should teach better. This is a natural human response. So the mind has lost equanimity. What happened through the years, you just realize it's got very little to do with me. The person simply is, in that state of mind that is not receptive. I've done my part to the best of my ability, and I know I've done it. Even if I've done it, it doesn't guarantee that the other person will necessarily capture what you're communicating. It doesn't guarantee. And that is a fact. So it is in it for you to understand the world is not meant to comply according to your standards. Because, and I'll finish with this finally, any situation that is presented to you has 4 possibilities. Now the problem is we only focus on the 2. We never get taught the other 2. And what are the first 2? Whenever something happens, it should be exactly keeping with what I want. This is how we all want it, right? I have an expectation, and that's how it wants to happen. This is okay. Sometimes you have an expectation of your kids, as an employer, as an employee, how you want, others to kind of, look at you. The second one is, I want things to be more than I expected. So I want things to be as I expected, and the second is, it should be more than I expect. Nobody complains then, right? If you get more than you expect, do you complain? Isn't it funny? Because what you asked is something, you asked for a certain level, a certain income, or whatever, money, right? And you get more. So you didn't get what you wanted, you got more and you don't complain. So these are the first two possibilities. The third one, now we go into dangerous territory, that breaks samatvam. And what breaks equanimity of the mind? I get opposite to what I expected. In other words, it totally doesn't work out as you anticipated. You've done the best you could, you thought it through, and it totally didn't work out. And the fourth one is you got less than you expected. And there's a nice example of this where you're crossing, want to catch the bus, and you catch the bus. You're on one side of the street, and you cross the street, and you catch the bus. You got exactly what you wanted. The second situation is you cross the street, and the bus stops and goes, and you miss the bus by 1 minute. So you got, what is this? Less than you expected, I guess, right? The third option is, you want to catch the bus, and you go to the bus station, and your friend with a sports car comes instead. He says, jump in. And you got more than you expected. You got a car. The fourth option, where you're totally opposite, is you want to cross the street, and there's a banana peel. Fall, break something, twist the ankle, totally miss the bus, anger on top of that, self-criticism. This is the reality. Any situation that's presented to you has four possibilities. If I live in the first two, samatvam, forget about it. If I add the extra two and understand they need to happen because that is the nature of the world. You are born on earth where four possibilities must happen in various degrees. Adding that, understanding that, equanimity becomes a lot more sensible. Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Eva Avashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.